Welcome to this next section, and it deals with keeping your superannuation fund SMSF definition intact. You may think, well, what's the big deal with keeping your definition intact? Well, simply put, if you lose the definition and you move your fund outside of the parameters of that definition, you no longer get the tax reduction of tax rates that you enjoy, along with other relaxing of some of the compliant measures, and your fund becomes what's called a small APRA fund and is administered and reportable directly to the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, and you really don't want to go down that track. So let's have a look at some of the areas that have been of concern and that are coming up more frequently, so that you know and can identify them as they arise. Don't ever take for granted that because you have a superannuation fund registered that you can't move outside of that definition by some of the actions that you take. Realise now, and this may not be the case for you, but just by way of knowledge, no longer is it the case that when you register to have a self-managed super fund, do you automatically receive that compliant status. There is a process which now goes on behind the scenes. The ATO have made changes as to how they will check the bona fides of the original trustees, etc., before they show a fund is compliant. Now, this can cause an issue with respect to the rolling over of existing superannuation benefits from another superannuation fund to your own self-managed fund. If you have any difficulties, there is a way to remedy this. The ATO has issued a letter to all current superannuation fund APRA funds, the likes of Sun Super and the big industry funds, letting them know of the change of status, and they need not withhold the rolling over of benefits to the new fund. The most common issues that I see with respect to some of the actions that happen within the superannuation fund that move it outside the definition are the single member or single member trustee issues, there being greater than 4 members and therefore greater than 4 trustees, the trustees becoming non-resident, and I've talked about that in another presentation, and the trustees receiving remuneration from the fund or having the fund pay their private expenses. These 4 issues are big ones that I see more prevalent now than what I have before. So let's talk about the first one being a single member, single trustee. Where there are individuals as trustees, there must be at least a minimum of 2 individuals. So Hans and Gretel are trustees of the Gone Fishing 2010 Super Fund. They're both members of the fund also. During the year, Hans and Gretel suffer break up in their marriage or in their partnership or their relationship, and Gretel wants out of the fund. She's paid out her share from the member's account, and therefore there's now only a single individual trustee of Hans. Hans got 60 days to remedy that with another individual trustee, or failing that, he can resign as trustee and appoint a proprietary limited or corporate trustee, with himself being the sole director. That's the remedy to that situation. But once again, there's only 60 days to get that done. This is becoming really prevalent at the moment, with there being greater than 4 members. Some trustees get enthused about the success of their super fund, or they're pretty upset about what's happening to the superannuation funds of their kids or their friends, and so they decide, well, let's get it all together. This is a very serious breach. There's no remedy, there's no 60 days. It is a breach and could have disastrous consequences. Once again, Hans and Gretel have triplets and they're all working. Their respective industry super funds are not doing well. They're being charged high fees, so Hans and Gretel allow their kids to join the fund. So there's the 3 kids. Hans and Gretel make 5 that are 5 members, and of course every member is a trustee, so 5 trustees and 5 members. And as that's greater than 4, they're in breach of section 17A, and the repercussions can be quite disastrous. Of course, if you move quickly, you can get one of them out or get the number down to 4 or less, and cross your fingers and hope that the Commissioner exercises his discretion, that you remedied the situation quickly. Next one is where the trustees become non-resident, and of course once again there's some real issues in relation to this, with trustees now being posted overseas or gaining overseas employment. We just need to make sure that we're involved in that process before you go, because once again there's no remedy to this issue other than the use of an enduring power of attorney to get over what's called the central management test. There are 3 big tests, and we can perhaps overcome some of the difficulties if you're going overseas for an extended period of time. Not if you're just going over for a holiday or for a 3 or even a 6-month stint for your work, but if it's greater than 6 months, then certainly we need to make some changes to your fund to make sure it stays within the definition of being a self-managed super fund. And of course the last one is dealing with the trustees receiving remuneration for their services. This seems to be raising its head again, and so we point out that trustees are not permitted to be remunerated for their duties acting as trustee. They're not to be paid for their time or effort, but they can be reimbursed for out-of-pocket expenses, but not for the time. And so if you incur expenses in buying magazines or paying to attend seminars, what have you, and it's not feasible for the fund to pay that expense themselves, certainly the trustee can incur that expense, put the receipt in to the fund and receive a reimbursement. We have to be very careful that we don't get in breach of the sole purpose test, and that's a big issue with super funds receiving superannuation fund trustees receiving remuneration. Here's a little bit of an example of that. Hans, who lives in Sydney, has direct property investments in Darwin. He decides to visit and make an inspection, complete some repairs and vet another tenant. He decides to not get a direct flight but goes via Alice Springs and spends a couple of days there and goes out to the McDonnell Ranges and has a bit of a look-see, hires a 4-wheel drive. Then he does his superannuation fund work in Darwin, but then stays on for a little bit and goes on a fishing expedition and goes out and checks out Arnhem Land and has a great time. And the super fund pays all those costs. Of course, that's a breach of the sole purpose test, a serious breach, and but it can be remedied. And so just be aware that if you have assets and you're incurring expenses to go and to inspect or make repairs or whatever, it is fair that the super fund pay the reasonable costs of that, but certainly the dominant purpose of the trip has to stay that, and it can't be seen to be a joint holiday and a trip. I think I've covered off most of this, and that is that it's a breach of the sole purpose test. There is a remedy that we can back out the private use part of his trip and turn it into a loan, and he reimburse the fund with some interest of that loan. So in summary, it's important that you stay within the definition of a self-managed super fund. If you have any questions relating to some of the activities of the fund or something that you're planning on doing or would like to do, it's always prudent. It's only a phone call or a quick email to Heather or Scott or myself here, and we can get that matter overcome for you. Thank you.